Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend in the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GC. Yeah, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo coats haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend in the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GC. Yeah, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo coats haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze.
Howdy, folks. Your host, Double J, back here, coming at you live from my studio/RV dining room, located directly inside America. Welcome back, folks, to the interwebs. Once again, your host of Operation GCD, JJ Vance here, and perhaps more notably, not the vice president. Anyhow, folks of the interwebs, once again, thanks for joining me here tonight to get a little GCD. We'll be your pilot and navigator here for tonight's shenanigan-infused journey into the mind of this particular garbage can dude. And folks of the interwebs, I'm not going to lie to you. Got a real barn burner here on deck for y'all tonight. It's the case of Dale Shackleford. Now, many folks here, Operation GCD folks of the interwebs, that is, y'all are familiar with the Idaho 4 case, obviously, and the matters of the quadruple homicide that occurred on November 13th, 2022, as we're told. Could have been November 12th, if you ask me, but nonetheless. Anyhow, it is those murky details that we're going to be addressing here, because we see the injustices and rights violations therein regarding Brian Coberger and the lack of justice to the victims there of the Idaho 4 murders. And in the case of Dale Shackleford, we see a lot of the, doing a comparative analysis, as we will be doing here tonight, folks of the interwebs. And once again, I thank you all for joining me here tonight to get a little GCD on the free Patreon preview side of tonight's tale. Check out patreon.com/Operation GCD for the full show here, but we'll be going over the introduction and some of those details and the characters involved, because not only it appears that this is a completely fabricated case against Dale Shackleford for the May 28th, 1999 alleged murder of his wife. We'll get into that in a second. May or may not have been his ex-wife, Shackleford's, and her new boyfriend, apparently on their first date, as we're told. There's some interesting details there. Fred Palahniuk, author Chuck Palahniuk, Fight Club, his father. And Chuck Palahniuk plays into the tale too, as Chuck Palahniuk is allegedly the one who tells Bill Thompson, the prosecutor, same Bill Thompson, that they should go for the death penalty. So he does play a part in it. And not only are we keeping it sus here, Lucy Morningstar 24/7, Latah County, Idaho, aka Satan's butthole, as I call it, they're keeping it sus. So we see not only Bill Thompson involved in this Dale Shackleford affair, which, again, we'll get into those details, but this is a circus amongst circuses, folks, the Dale Shackleford situation. He's a tough man to defend, or try to substantiate any defense, that is. We'll get into the many, many reasons why. Notably, he's a convicted kid diddler predating this event. In fact, he meets his wife, ex-wife, an alleged murder victim, Donna Fontaine, while he's doing that prison time. She's an attorney teaching some courses inside the prison. That's strange. So there's a lot of those strange details, though. One of the most telling details that regarding that case and Donna Fontaine may not being the murder victim, as argued by Dale Shackleford, her ex-husband, the deceased body inside the burnt-up cabin in Latah County, southern Latah County, just outside of Kendrick. Well, apparently that woman laying there with Fred Palahniuk was identified by one tooth only. They identified Palahniuk by his whole dental records, apparently. Donna Fontaine, one tooth, and apparently that body, alleged to be Donna Fontaine, had a uterus. And argued by Dale Shackleford in his initial trial, and apparently ignored. They don't like objective evidence there in Latah County. It seems constitutional rights do not exist there in Satan's butthole. So, because apparently you can convict a man if there seems to be no clear indication that lady was not the burnt up lady in the cabin alleged to be Donna Fontaine. Well, doesn't seem to be any conclusion that the burnt up body, seemed to, in fact, did have a uterus. So how this was ever determined, or again, glossed by, I feel like. So we're going to be playing tonight one of my favorite games here at Operation GCD relative to these matters, unpacking the comparison between the Shackleford case prosecution and the Coberger prosecution by the same prosecutor, Bill Thompson, and other characters involved in tonight's tale there in Latah County, or as I like to call them, Muppets. They're also still present today, and in some measure of authority. So that is the sheriff, Skiles. Now, he's an interesting character because he's in attendance at the first press conference for Coberger, but does not make any statements. Well, until very recently, he's made a couple statements, but makes no statements, and those statements are on the jailing of Coberger when Coberger was in his jail before moved to Boise. But he does not make any statements about the actual homicides or the investigation. Never has. And it was old Skiles there that was the first deputy on scene for the alleged murder there of Donna Fontaine and the murder of Fred Palahniuk, Chuck Palahniuk's father, allegedly at the hands of Dale Shackleford. The other deputy on scene was the current chief deputy. So we have the current sheriff, Skiles, and the current chief deputy, Best, B-E-S-S-T. You know, his Muppet Donut version here. It's a lot of S's because, you know, apparently they can't spell in Idaho because they don't understand the Constitution or rights for that matter. And again, Dale Shackleford is just an example because, you know, at the end of the day, rights apply to everyone, even convicted kid diddlers. You can't just put a murder case on them. But, you know, again, there's a lot more to this tale. And the more I looked at this tale and try to wrap my brain hole around it, well, it gets very interesting. But before we go any further, as I like to play this game, 6 Degrees, got a new take on it tonight, comparing the 6 degrees of a fabricated murder case, Bill Thompson style, Latah County. Well, it's also my effort here at Operation GCD to do a Make-A-Wish for actor Kevin Bacon. And I'll let him introduce that for us.
The 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. In case you haven't heard of this game, the idea is that any actor alive or dead can be connected to me through our work in 6 steps or less. How did all this start? In 1994, I'm minding on my own business. I'm making movies. I'm trying to raise my family. And I don't remember exactly how I first heard about it, but it just kind of started to seep into my life. You know, people will come up to me and say things like, you know, my cousin made up a game about you. Or, dude, I'm so hungover, man. I was in a bar last night, and we were playing your game. I got shit-faced, and I'm a mess. I was absolutely horrified. I was furious. But I stopped, and I said to myself, you know, sometimes you have to confront your demons. Sometimes you got to face the beast. So I said, I'm going to go in, and I'm going to look these guys in the eyes. I'm going to say, listen, fellas, you know, get another Patsy, okay? You know, find somebody else.
You asked for it, Kevin Bacon. 6 degrees of a fabricated murder case in Latah County, Idaho, that is. Satan's butthole. So, as we see here, there's going to be a lot of similarities, and some of those high points I'll hit on right here before I go over a couple of the high points in the anomalous features of the Shackleford case. And more anomalous features, Sheriff Skiles and old Chief Deputy Best there have no problems making comments on not only the Shackleford case, but that Meister case that's referenced in regards numerous times in the proceedings of Coberger, another murder case out of Latah County that also involves the same characters, Best and Skiles. So they have no problem doing investigation discovery shows on those cases in 2018 and 2019. Mum's the word on the most heinous murder case in the state's history when it occurs in their jurisdiction, though. That's odd. And again, the statements they make in regards to some of these matters are very strange because the more I look at the Shackleford case, I'll get into in a second as we get over some of those details. It's fucking strange, folks. I'm not gonna lie to you, it's fucking strange. So not only do I not expect to find Nazis directly involved in the Shackleford matters, which they are, you know, that same Aryan Nations compound up there in northern Idaho. That's strange, right? Seems that all these activities seem to focus around there. And on top of that, all of these folks involved in the Shackleford matters, his ex-wife, his fiance, her folks, some other people, they all are from Missouri, 2,000 miles from Latah County, and they maintain properties in both locations. In fact, Shackleford's ex-wife starts building a home next door to his new fiance there in Latah County, who's from Latah County. That's strange. And again, very odd details like that, but nonetheless, one of Shackleford's primary defense in regards to his alibi was, I could not have murdered my ex-wife and Fred Palahniuk because I was meeting with the Aryan Nations in Lewiston. That's funny. So Lewiston, obviously, is where Brian Coberger allegedly was passing through out of the ways of Wawaway Park there in Washington. It's just southwest of Pullman. So step one, do not be in Lewiston. Otherwise, you might get accused of murder you did not commit. So step two, in this 6 degrees game, it's more of a 1 degree is don't be in Lewiston, right? Or, don't have an alibi in that regard. Also, don't have an alibi that no one wants to talk about. Because, again, no one wants to talk about Coberger's alibi, despite him producing an alibi and, allegedly at that park with cell phone records to substantiate that. We still saw the state play a lot of games. So the state played a lot of games when Dale said he was meeting with the Aryan Nations. Like, you can't say that, Dale. You can't be talking about meeting with Nazis here, bud. So the second degree is no witnesses. The state, we've even seen in recent interviews from Bilbert Thompson, Latah County prosecutor, and others such as Blaker and not Blaker, the new police chief, Dollinger, who was the previous captain. We see these folks making statements. It's Sheriff Skiles there, Latah County. We see folks making statements that, they're even admitting they can't place Coberger at the scene, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the same applied to Shackleford. Basically, they admitted they couldn't put him at the scene. And so we see that as a second degree. And there's no witnesses. We see no witnesses for Coberger, right? Yet we see prosecutions on these matters. And, it's an interesting take on justice, I would say, when you start putting all these pieces together and seeing a cogent sight picture of whatever the fuck's going on there in Satan's butthole, aka Latah County. Because we got characters like this meet prosecutor Bill Thompson because he can't spell and they don't know the Constitution there. He can't read, apparently. We see these matters, again, over decades with the same parties. And there's still no justice in these matters. That's something that should be said about that as far as what the fuck's really going on here. And then we look at a matter like this issue with Shackleford, and again, there's a group of folks surrounding Shackleford, the victims, with the exception of Fred Palahniuk, who's from nearby Washington State, about Kennewick, Washington, and like Pasco. That's where the Palahniuks hail from before they came here from Ukraine. I believe actually Fred was born in North Dakota when the family moved to North Dakota from the Ukraine. They came to America, but we see this issues where these folks are somehow trying to see how it's about an hour, I think, from let me just double check here for, I guess, Pasco, Washington. So the story here is we have a group of folks, Shackleford, his wife, his ex-wife, the attorney who he met in prison when he was a kid diddler there in Missouri. We have her family. Her brother lives now in Latah County at this time. That's strange. We have the folks that Shackleford's new fiance, Sonia Abbott's, and her folks and her brother, they live next door to this property in which Donna Fontaine, the murder victim, right, is going to is apparently murdered at. So we have these weird group of folks that are primarily not from that area, with the exception of this Abbott's family and Fred Palahniuk. And we see a matter of about, it's about an hour and a half from Kendrick to Pasco, where Fred Palahniuk's from. And again, we see these folks from Ironton, Missouri, the Ozarks. Again, Donna Fontaine, Dale Shackleford, and numerous other parties that we're going to look into here tonight are all from this great distance away from these locations, maintaining different properties. Now, Shackleford's got a trucking business that he does hazmat, which I would argue that's a good way to get some of those chemicals needed for, like meth production and stuff. The other thing to consider here around this group of folks is it seems like they're a sex cult. Shackleford's banging all these women, apparently, even the ones that get to testify against him. So that's all very strange details regarding these matters, folks. And matters will be unpacking the night here, because that's the next, and the 6 degrees, we got the 3rd degree after no witnesses, no forensic evidence. What I mean by that is we see in the Coberger case, there's no blood. They've yet to produce a knife sheath. A knife sheath, I assert, does not exist. And the DNA stuff had no custody, chain of custody. We know it doubled in size, et cetera, so on and so forth. Well, they didn't even have forensic evidence here. So, we see the total lack on both of these cases, again, by the same prosecutorial team and the same court systems, decades apart. And we see in between these cases that Meister case, which again involves more Nazis. So why we keep, I guess if I started looking at a lot of these matters, I didn't really consider a lot of these matters to be Nazi related, especially that same Aryan compound. And again, the same Aryan compound that has a lot of connections to this area of Missouri already. And not the least of which, one of the primary witnesses here that was squeezed to testify against Dale Shackleford, another one of those women that he's apparently banging that have properties in both locations, a woman by the name of Martha Millar, who by all appearances, and I can't 100% confirm this, folks, appears to be connected to that Elohim City Millar family, which has direct connections to the Aryan Nation and the order, that 1980s domestic terror campaign by those Nazis up there. Bombings, murders, robberies, that kind of thing. No big deal. But again, all of those things have up there out of that same compound and those same group have connections to very spooky operations of Operation Gladio style domestic terror campaigns, including satanic Nazi serial killers like, not the least of which, Israel Keyes, who grew up with the Kehoe brothers, who went on the 1990s domestic terror campaign, shooting folks, murking folks. In fact, they were down there in that area, Missouri and Arkansas, murking folks and robbing folks, the Kehoe brothers in the 90s, mid-90s. So that's strange to find a Millar associated with this case, being a chief witness against Shackleford. Shackleford, a man who claims that, by all appearances, was never proven to be wrong, that the victim inside the home, the burnt-up cabin with Fred Palahniuk, alleged to be Donna Fontaine, his ex-wife, had a uterus, and Donna Fontaine had no uterus. He maintains his innocence to this day from a blog claiming these same things. Now, he's changed his story a little bit, old Dale, but as far as the events that transpired that day, nonetheless, we see the next degree, the 4th degree. We see Thompson attempt to get Dale Shackleford to plead to these murders if he drops the death penalty. Now, we saw that being successful with Coberger, and here's why I think that was successful, and that's because part of that 4th degree of the fabricated murder case situation is if you can't get them to plead down, you squeeze their family. So we saw all of a sudden in May of this past year, before all this police stuff and everything else like that, we saw the state release a selfie of Coberger claiming that was some sort of evidence of something, even though they would later state, oh, he's got a lot of those same selfies. Takes him a lot with a thumbs up. I don't blame him. Anyhow, that's not evidence of anything. And again, we see these matters of being with Shackleford. Any evidence there is, whatever it says, is evidence against Shackleford. If it doesn't exist, then that's evidence. Am I back? We see the same thing with Coberger. There's no evidence in his home, his car, nothing. There's nothing connecting with cell phones, etc. But that's evidence that he just hit it or he wiped his cell phone, even though they have reports saying that he didn't wipe his cell phone. We still hear reports from the media and whatnot. Oh, he wiped his cell phone. So, we see a lot of these same similarities. So with Coberger, I genuinely believe that once we saw that the machinations of this same plan that Thompson's rolled out, not only in this Shackleford case, but in that Meister case, the other case in which Skiles and Chief Deputy Best have no problems doing TV shows on in advance of, the 2022 homicides of the Moscow 4, right? Idaho 4. So we see this one, Welcome to Murder Town. We see that was in December of 2018. That's the one about Donna Fontaine and her boyfriend, Fred Palahniuk. So we see them both interviewed in that program. So they have no problems giving interviews on that stuff. But lo and behold, folks, far be it, they have an actual homicide. The most heinous homicides in the state's history happens in their jurisdiction. Chief Best and Sheriff Skiles, mum's the word. And again, we see them. I'm not going to play much of that show. I do have the trailer from it because we see Skiles in there. And again, he looks comfortable talking. He looks comfortable talking to News Nation's Brian Enton recently, telling him about how Coberger was in his jail, but he doesn't want to talk about them murders. Again, he's the sheriff. And again, folks don't realize this, that the Moscow PD work for the corporation, the incorporated city of Moscow, Idaho. They represent the business interests, and the board that sits on the Moscow PD board, I'm most certain, represents the business interests of the city. And again, the U.S. Supreme Court allows them to do such matters with rulings since there was a case out of Colorado. It was a Supreme Court ruling in '98 where they decided police don't have a duty to protect and serve the people. So there's no reason why anyone should believe the incorporated police department of a city would have any interest thereof. But however, the sheriff, the elected representative of the people, Sheriff Skiles, he should, in fact, have some statements because, again, he is the people's right to justice. But we just see him mupping it up unless you get a camera in his face. But it should be noted also, there's a lot of Hollywood-style connections as well here before the events when we see them in these investigation discovery channels. I'm just saying they got to know. It's not a matter. What I mean there is it's not a matter of them being shy with the cameras. Why they've never made any statements is a different story altogether. But it's an interesting dynamic, right? It's an interesting dynamic. And I just got a clip here of that show just to show folks once again, because this is a man who doesn't make any statements about the Idaho 4 murders. He hasn't made a lot of statements about any of these cases outside of these TV shows, quite honestly. But he doesn't seem to have a problem making that statement. And hearing these TV shows going on camera, right?
The whole city is talking about this monster.
That's not the right clip. I apologize. In fact, while we're on that clip, I'll play the. Nope. Somewhere I did this clip with the investigation discovery. Well, let me find that clip here, folks. Anyhow, the matters at hand here seem very interesting to me because when we look again at the fifth degree, let's go with while I look for this clip, let's go with that fifth degree. So once you, well, actually, let's finish the fourth degree. So once you can't plea him down, right? Which again, Coberger pled, and I think this is why you charge the family. So once Dale Shackleford could not be charged or plea, he refused to plea, claims his innocence. Again, the whole uterus defense, right? He said he was in Lewiston with the Aryans, right? They're like, whoa, buddy, you can't be saying that. So then they charge the family. So they charge his fiance with accessory after the fact. They charge her mother. Again, these are the neighbors to the deceased woman, allegedly, right? His ex-wife, Donna Fontaine. Why all of these people live next door to each other. And again, an ex-wife that allegedly, by all claims and all appearances and all records, at the time, Donna Fontaine had a rape charge against her ex-husband, Dale Shackleford, for allegedly raping her 13-year-old daughter. Now, that is Shackleford's MO. That is what he was in prison for the first time. And all of these folks seem to be diddlers. Even the folks that testify against Shackleford are diddlers. A lot of diddlers, a lot of Nazis, not a lot of objective facts or evidence, but we see Thompson squeeze the family. So the neighbors, the fiance, the parents. When the father, the fiance's father, that is the Abbotts next door, when he initially gets charged for perjury, they drop that to testify against the rest of them, right? Now, all of that circus is after the police have no idea what's going on in life. They literally have no clue. Thumbs up their asses. Literally. So the murders occur in May of 1999. The police don't have any indication or clue until 2000. So February, when someone allegedly drops, and I say allegedly, someone drops an alleged anonymous audio recording to, I believe it was the Lewistown Tribune. And that ends up being this Millar woman who was apparently banging Shackleford. and also this Latah woman who's apparently banging Shackleford. Now, her husband's also an attorney. And these people, again, have properties in Latah County and down in the Ozarks in Missouri, 2,000 miles away. This is all very strange stuff, folks. But these folks get squeezed. The two folks that dropped the tape, allegedly, they get squeezed and then testify. That is Millar and this woman right here, convicted kid diddler, Latah. Again, they were all apparently banging, by their own admissions, they're apparently all banging Shackleford. Now, she gets this, it's interesting, though, too, because she gets this forcible rape of a 12-year-old female in Missouri, right, on November of 1999, right? So it's just interesting when we start looking at some of those dates, too, and how this case gets fabricated because they start putting a squeeze on these folks. So I assert that same squeeze was being put on Brian Coberger. And how you get charges dropped, and folks I'm not saying she didn't rape that 12-year-old, but she got a deal on that case. That woman's been out of prison. And all of these folks, with the exception of Shackleford, spent no more than, I believe, a year in prison. The fiance and mother both got 2 to 7. They got 6 months, though, total. They got released. The father of the fiance, he testified against him, got his perjury charges dropped. Millar and Latah testified against him, and they got their stuff greatly reduced, again, to less than a year. So we see all of these folks around here. We had properties in different locations, seemingly sex cult related activities, trucking company, maybe drug related stuff. We got Nazis, right? So all very interesting because no one really gets down to the facts of the matters. And we see the same folks who are in authority today in that town and county, they're involved directly in this case. So the fourth degree of the fabricated murder case, Bilbert Thompson style, Latah County, is in fact, if you can't get them to plea, squeeze the families. Now, it is interesting to note that the moment the police responded, all of these parties were on scene at that burning cabin. And I'll play a clip on how there's almost no local media footage of these matters, like the court proceedings over the years with Shackleford, who we'll get to in a second, regarding the games being played with that death penalty situation in Idaho. So that kind of also applies to Coberger. But when we see these matters of these degrees of the fabricated murder case, that fourth one is squeeze the family, right? If you can't get them to plea, which is what we saw happen. And I presume back in May when that selfie was released of Coberger and the state started reporting that Coberger called his folks at 6:30 in the morning, which would have been 9:30 East Coast time, which seems reasonable. Now, Bethany Funk calls her folks at 6:30 or 7:30 in the morning, I believe, or 7 in the morning, on at least in the public transcript that we know about, and no one makes an issue of that. Yet it seems the state was going to charge Coberger's folks with accessories after the fact, like they did Shackleford's fiance and her folks. So these are some interesting dynamics when we start looking at how they do a murder case in Latah County. And again, it seems to be the ongoing mode of operations today. So the fifth degree is, well, when you don't have any evidence and the dead body in the cabin has a uterus and your alleged victim doesn't have a uterus by all medical records confirming such and arguments by the defense, well, we'll just ignore that and we'll just make up some evidence, which is what we saw with Coberger. And we see that again with the same case here in the Shackleford matters. Now, again, in between, you have that Meister affair, which again, they cite a bunch of Odinism, Nazi stuff in that whole case. It involves Thompson, Kathy Mabutz, public defender, especially in the appeals. Somehow, Shackleford got a different public offender in his appeals, which that's interesting. And then later, he just represented himself. So again, and he had to fight for his death penalties to be overturned, despite the fact a Supreme Court ruling in 2002 ruled him unconstitutional because a judge can't hand it down a death penalty. It has to be a jury. The Supreme Court ruled, yet from 2002 to 2011, they played games with Shackleford. So we see the games they're willing to play there with regards to violations of rights and whatnot in Idaho. And then again, the fifth degree there in the creating your evidence, right? In regards to if you have none, and you're ignoring things such as the uterus, or you're ignoring things like, any matters with Coberger, he was never able to provide evidence or any alibis, right? Which is what we see here. So the judge and the courts refused any aspect of, including the uterus defense, of Shackleford defending himself. No alternative perpetrators, etc. Now we see the same matters with the Meister case in the same group of personnel in Latah County about a decade later. These cases are all about a decade apart. Shackleford, Meister, and then the Idaho 4 murders. And again, the Meister case, they do an investigation discovery show on that too with Skiles and Best. It's interesting. So when we see those, the fifth degree also, and not only no evidence, create your evidence, ignore the objective evidence, uterus defense, etc. You can't even present an alternate perpetrator. How was that justice? How, and again, these are the matters at hand with Coberger. So we see the same playbook here unpacking it in a 6 degrees fashion. The other thing that really weirds me out, well, the last degree, that is, folks, is we saw the 60, I believe it was 63 terabytes of dick pics that got sent to Coberger's defense, which seemingly was mainly all fluff and nonsense. As they're releasing the reports, nothing in those reports leads to Coberger. And also in those reports and photographs, there seemed to be a lot of crime being committed there, if you ask me. But nonetheless, we see a lot of that was videotape. A lot of pointless videotapes that they sent to the defense, a lot of pointless paperwork. We see the same thing here. So they flooded Shackleford's defense, and they said they had over 250 witnesses. We saw the state of Idaho argue that to Coberger's defense. Coberger's like, we got these experts, and the state's like, we got like 10 times your experts. Double that bitch. So we see them respond in the same capacity. It's all fluff. They're posturing, the state is. They didn't have all those kind of witnesses or evidence, and they didn't have it here in this Coberger case. We see the same thing. So, but Shackleford's attorneys stated that they argued that time, distance, and the volume of information they were flooded with prevented them from providing an accurate defense for their client. Now, I think there's more to that story too, because Shackleford apparently threatens the lives of those attorneys during and or the aftermath. And his initial appeal, cites those threats. Apparently, some Nazis were threatening the defense team, get Dale off or else kind of deals, right? So I don't know, folks. Did we have some of that going on here? Because I feel like Coberger's defense team kind of threatened. Not only did they get flooded with those all the nonsense and fluff that they could never go through, like Shackleford did. It seems like maybe like Shackleford's attorneys, Coberger's attorneys were getting threatened too. So I do think that is a salient characteristic here, folks, when we're talking about the 6 degrees of a fabricated murder prosecution there in Latah County. And this case just gets weirder and weirder. But let me play you a clip here from how there's not a lot of coverage from even the news media over the years regarding the ongoing affairs of Shackleford and his appeals. I mean, he's appealed a lot. Again, the state played a lot of games for a decade over that death penalty after the U.S. Supreme Court said no. So even in appeals, he couldn't argue anything. They wouldn't accept it. We've seen the Coberger situation boxed out too. For example, Judge Hippler argued that in the relative to alternate perpetrators, well, he said, well, yeah, they didn't. He argued, said, well, those guys didn't drive a white Elantra, so they couldn't commit the crime. Well, that was never established as fact, but he used it as fact in which to argue out the alternate perpetrators, thereby boxing out any sort of legitimate constitutional defense of Dale Shackleford. Now, I agree. A convicted kid diddler is a lot harder to stand up for than to Brian Coberger, but rights are rights, folks. And not only that, I calls them how's it sees them, balls and strikes, that is. And, if a convicted kid diddler doesn't have, if they can do this to a convicted kid diddler, I mean, it's not as easy maybe to another, lay citizen, if you will. But let's be honest, folks, if they're going to make all this shit up and get a jury to convict somebody, the fix is in a lot of these places, and Latah County seems to be one of those places. So nonetheless, Idaho in general, because we saw it go down to Ada County with the Coberger situation and the Attorney General's office, et cetera, and that's why I call Idaho Satan's butthole.
Bud.
Yeah, no, that's a good point there. So, at this festival, they meet John, Mary, and Sonia Abitz, or Abitz. They are neighbors. They're the closest neighbors to this house that they're building. So they've gotten to know these people while they're building the house, and they talk to them, and they live close. It's a small little rural town. Yeah. Nobody else lives out here. You talk to your neighbors.
You're forced to be friends.
You're forced to be friends. Right. They're all at the festival together. After they left the festival, Gary, the brother, goes to the Abitz house to hang out, which is right next door. But he leaves around dark, and as he's returning home, he sees that Donna's pickup is in the driveway of the house they're building, and he smells smoke. And so he's like, what's going on here? So he calls the Abitz's house and says, hey, I think the garage is on fire. We need to call the fire department. I think they're building a 2-story garage. Yeah. Like, I think that's on fire. So Mary, Sonia, and the Abitzes, and Ted Meskey, who's Mary's brother, and Dale Shackleford, where'd he come from all of a sudden?
What the fuck?
They arrive at the fire. Yeah. They're all there, and there's various people trying to extinguish it. They're acting like they're trying to put it out, and they're trying to put it out, and no one can get it out. So 7:40 p.m., the Latah County Sheriff Patrol, a deputy named Richard Skiles, he gets called to investigate the fire. He comes out. He gets there. He observes everybody standing around the garage. Right. It's completely engulfed in flames. They had given up putting it out at this point. It's taken over. You're not going to put it
Just
out
let it burn out
with a garden hose. Right. Anyway, that's not going to work. They get some information from Ted, the Ted guy we talked about, Mary's brother, Abitz's brother, and Dale Shackleford. They get, based on some information they get, the deputy contacts dispatch and has a detective sent out because, quote, there was a possibility that there could be a suicide victim in the fire. So they're like, okay, they're sending it out. They're investigating. This is all very muddy at this point here. Fire department gets there. The garage was completely destroyed by the time the fire department got there. I mean, it was just absolutely destroyed. Several hours later, they put the fire out. They get all the, they get all the embers out. They get it all out to where it's safe to walk through the thing, and no one's going to get burned or whatever, and the smoke is out, and whatever, that sort of thing here. So they get in there. As they go through everything and pick through the fire, they find 2 bodies in the rubble. Here in the fire
That's
rubble.
Not a suicide.
2 badly burned bodies, too. Very bad, so bad that it was very hard to identify them. Later on, they did find out that it's Donna and Fred.
Of course it is.
In the garage, obviously here.
Well, there we go, folks. Isn't that a weird circumstance? So the first officer on scene there now, Sheriff Skiles, he finds a group of folks standing outside the crime scene. However, in this circumstance, every party that was standing out there was charged with a crime. Shackleford, again, they live next door to his soon-to-be ex-wife, who's allegedly got a rape charge against him in Missouri, yet they're living next door to each other in Latah County, Idaho, allegedly. And Donna Fontaine, that ex-wife, meets, allegedly, again, murky details, allegedly meets Fred Palahniuk on a personals ad, in a classified online interwebs classifieds ad there in April of 99, weeks prior to this event. This is allegedly their first and or second date. And as we heard in the official narrative that would be developed later, Donna Fontaine and her brother, also from Missouri, who has a different property in Latah County, Gary Fontaine, they're out at the fair with their neighbors, the Abbotts, who is the fiance, Sonia, of Donna's ex-husband, who Donna's the chief witness of in a rape charge against Dale back in Missouri. How does that make sense? Why is she hanging out with her ex-husband, who's just got rape charges against, living next door to these folks too? These tales don't make any sense, folks. Then you start adding in the uterus stuff, the uterus defense, which they won't hear, and then et cetera, et cetera. Then you got the Nazi aspects. Again, the Millar family, chief witness, she's the one who drops the tape. So again, the police are thumbs up their asses about all these matters for months. So the murders occur in May 28th, 1999. And in February of 2000, I believe it was maybe December of 99, but really got public attention in February. They, this Millar lady, Martha Millar, who again, all of these folks connect to the Ozarks, and the Millar family, those are the folks behind Elohim City. I can't, not 100%, but it seems to be the same Millar family. And again, it makes sense because those are the same Elohim City that already has connections to the Aryan nations. The same Aryan nations Dale claims to be meeting with at the time of the murders. Literally, that was his defense. He was in Lewiston at the time of the murders near Kendrick, about 20 miles away, or 17 or so. So A lot of weird connections there, but we see that tape getting dropped by Millar and that kid diddler who just got charged in November of 99 in Missouri. Again, who's married to a different attorney, because again, Dale's wife's an attorney, married to a different attorney, and she gets squeezed. She's also apparently banging Shackleford. So they're Millar and what was her name? Kid diddler lady, Latah. They dropped this tape allegedly anonymously to Lewiston saying, blah, 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 blah. Dale tried, Dale's the one who did it, yada, 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 right? So the police have already had all these folks identified from moment one when they came on scene. The folks end up charging in all of this, but their investigation does not lead in that direction whatsoever. In fact, news media reports are interesting to look at during that time because they paint an interesting picture about that investigation. It's very strikingly similar to the manner in which we saw the investigation in the Idaho 4 go on, right? In which it seemingly went cold almost immediately. Well, that's, the impression, at least it was presented here too. So this is an article from, let's see here. What's the date on this one? This one's December. And it says, couples' mysterious deaths still stump Idaho authorities. You mean to tell me 5 months after these matters, they don't have a clue? Yet suddenly they have every clue, and all parties involved were already at the scene when they showed up. The neighbors, the ex-husband, etc. It would be described by the state that the reason why Shackleford would murder Donna Fontaine and her new boyfriend, besides jealousy, is because she was the chief witness in that rape situation in Missouri against her own daughter. So why is she and her daughter living next door to the ex-husband and her new fiance? And why are they hanging out with the fiance's family at a fair that day? Make that make sense, folks. And why does no one want to be clear of how Fred Palahniuk gets involved in these matters? Online dating, that's it. There's no other, and again, he doesn't live that close to the matters that, he would, I'm not saying it's not true that he met that lady that way, but odd first date to get murked, right? And yes, PatCon, absolutely. Again, this is all, I didn't expect to find all these PatCon stuff. That's what I said when I'm trying to wrap my brain hole around all this stuff. These are all disturbing Muppets. It's tough. I did not, again, I'm not the vice president. I did not expect to find so many Nazis here. The same Nazis. The same Nazis, I would argue, that have deep connections to this Idaho 4 situation, not the least of which Mark Furman, that Nazi felon from LAPD who lives up there by the old Aryan compound, who's been perpetrating propaganda for Fox News for multiple years now against telling everybody Brian Coberger did it starting in December of 2022. December 30th, as soon as they arrested him, Furman said, yep, we got him. He did it. And he made some interesting comments. He actually leaked a lot of things. I would say that he had some close details of the investigation that would be used, not an actual investigation. Let's not get distracted here now, folks. These aren't actual investigations, but Furman knew details of the false narrative early on in December that would later get leaked to the public, presented to the public later. How the fuck did he know? That's what I'm saying. He had direct connections to that Aryan compound going back to the 80s during the order. The order is that they just did a movie about it. That was the 80s terror campaign. This compound, by numerous reports, likes to do 10-year domestic terror campaigns. But again, they're all seemingly associated with Colby's queers. Operation Gladio. Bill Colby and his Operation Gladio Phoenix program, Come Home, serial killers and domestic terror. And they all seem to go through that area up there. Strange. But I did not expect to see that. So one of the narratives, again, Dale got a blog. He's been telling a bunch of tales, some of which are different as far as the events that transpired that day. But again, we see the law enforcement suddenly have no clue. And they're like, oh, shit, these people we've known about for 7 months did it all. And we have all that information courtesy of an anonymous recording dropped off to the local paper. Very suspect situations there, folks. But we do see also the matter of something I would say another striking similarity around the environment. So we close this thing out here, folks, before we go over to the Patreon side. And I do thank you all for joining me here tonight to get a little GCD. And I hope you all can join us over there for the rest of the conversation and join in the conversation. Patreon.com/Operation GCD. Because again, these folks, we see Bill Thompson, Sheriff Skiles, the chief deputy. These are the folks that are involved all directly in the Shackleford matter. We see, again, a lot of, so what I'm saying is if there is a large scale ongoing operations of hood rat shit in that region, seemingly a lot of Nazi Satanist kind of connections, processing that is, right? We have the Gooch, the major figure in the false incrimination of false perpetration of this, murder conviction against Coberger. We have the Gooch, who goes directly back to the Tate Polanski murders through her father. We have the guy that introduced the Tate Polanskis, Cocaine Bob Evans, his direct protege. Graydon Carter has been running point through airmail. He's the guy that runs airmail, Howard Bloom's boss, running point on all these, propaganda pieces that folks like Mark Furman and News Nation repeat. Makes you wonder, folks. Makes you wonder, because it seems a lot of drug trafficking going around that area too, and that is one of the processes MOs too. And again, very much Nazi Satanists, so they very much get along with them Nazis. Because back to the Charles Manson days and some of those process incidents in '69, well, he was using the outlaw biker gangs to transport drugs and whatnot, and do deliveries. That seems to be what we have here. Not the least of which, an indication of that going on in a report. And again, more malfeasance, I would argue, in the hiding up of these details. Again, no one really likes to talk about a lot of these matters. The few podcasts that have done anything on Shackleford are simply reading newspaper accounts and court records. And again, even in this court, how does that make sense? The now sheriff, Skiles, then deputy, comes on scene. 7 months later, they charge all those parties. They have no investigation into which, until some audio recording is released 7 months later, and suddenly, boom, we know all those people did it. Make any of this stuff make sense, right? But we see these matters again, perpetrating outlaw biker gangs, lack of reporting on drugs and other matters in numerous cases in and around that area. Not the least of which, in a matter that was recently reported in the those released documents, there was an investigation report done on a man who was reporting on being security for illicit shipments of some regard to the 1122 King home. He was I've seen people shitcoat out of this matter, but this, by all appearances, it's this man right here who was part of an outlaw biker gang. He was an escape artist. He seems to have been a informant for the U.S. Marshals at minimum, if not other organizations. He died under very mysterious circumstances this past January, and I would say dead men don't talk. Dead witnesses do not talk. And not the least of which, he happened to also grow up. He's not only in close proximity in age to old lead detective Brett Payne in the Moscow, Idaho force. He grew up right down the same road of him in a town of 4,000 folks there in St. Maries, Idaho. That's interesting. In fact, it seems to be Brett Payne's uncle, who's a judge in that county. Seems to be his uncle, Judge Payne there. He was involved in some of these litany of criminal acts this man's been involved in that county. He's definitely overseen some of those cases. And again, he died a very mysterious death here in January, once again, evading police. This man's escaped from numerous prisons. I'm not joking you. This guy's an escape artist. He gets spotted by the marshals in, I believe it was Kootenai County, and goes in pursuit back in January. They track him down to a dead end. He goes into the woods, goes through a culvert, a ditch, goes into the woods. They then go after him. Hours later, they claim they go and start interviewing his associates. Hours later, they go back to that last place they saw him when he ran into the woods out of that culvert. They found him dead in a few inches of water in that culvert. That makes no sense, folks. Not the least of which, this man is an escape artist many times over. But the one thing I want to point out there, again, see, here we go. He's got so many accounts of escaping, numerous jails. And we see in the case that's mentioned in that report that they interviewed this guy apparently before he died and said he was involved in dropping off illicit shipments and yada, yada, yada. And he was arrested. He gave the details of, confirmation of some of those details of some of those shipments and whatnot. And one of those details he mentions in that law enforcement report in the recent releases, he says that he was involved in he got picked up on November 13th and, yada, yada. Nez Pierce gets shipped up to, etc. on a warrant up there. But what they don't mention is the 500 fentanyl pills, the nearly pound of marijuana, and the $3,000 cash and multiple scales found in that car. So again, they keep obfuscating these details from these matters. Even in that report they were taking about these, that guy making the statements about dropping some drugs off 1122 King and doing the security because he was an outlaw biker, dude. Well, they forgot to mention that in that law enforcement report. That dude also got picked, when he got picked up in that report that they're talking about, a lot of drugs. And again, we saw the same thing regarding a matter over in Pullman regarding a Washington State University instructor or professor back in 2013. Again, this case speaks also to the spooky nature of whatever the fuck's going on around there. So the 4 suspects, 2 townies, 2 students of Washington State get picked up for the January 13 near beat to death of a college professor at Pullman, Washington State. It was caught because of the camera systems that the feds had paid for. The Washington State Pullman Criminal Justice Department had by PhD students there, like Coberger. That program was overseeing some of these camera systems that were funded by the feds. This goes back to 2011, 2012 when they installed those things before this case. One of the townies involved in this has a lot of meth dealings. I don't know if the gay, I'm not saying all gay college professors do meth. I'm just saying that is prevalent in that community. A lot of uppers in that community. I'm just saying that, and one of the suspects here, a lot of meth stuff. One of the people that nearly beat this man to death. They never came to a conclusion of how or what was really the motivating factor there. I would argue some weird sex stuff, if you ask me. But nonetheless, 2 of the students there were busted. The 2 townies and the 2 students there, the 4 folks. The 2 students were busted. They had fled campus. They were living in Western Washington, where they were from. Somehow, someone from Western Washington, allegedly, again, unidentified anonymous tips, like the unidentified anonymous tip, which later was put on these 2 ladies, Miller and the Lasater. There's some anonymous tip there that just calls the Pullman PD like, hey, these 2 students did it. So I don't know. It just seems like a lack of justice around those parts. A lot of drug stuff involving a lot of these major events, murders and assaults and whatnot. And a lot of Nazis. So I'd stay away from Latah County, Idaho, folks, let alone Mexico or Venezuela. I don't disagree, sir, but the folks consider this place to be a safe place. It's not. Look at the data. The crime data for Latah County is nearly double the average for the state, both property and violent. It's not a sleepy college town, folks. There's a lot of weird shit going on there, a lot of drug stuff going on there, even in around that campus. So, and when you look at all these matters and take them in totality of how long these things have been going on there, it's really not a shock to me to find Iran-Contra money launderers directly associated with University of Idaho President Scott Green, that being Leon Black, and that whole Sam Bankman-Fried FTX situation amongst all this hood rat shit. What I'm saying is this stuff didn't happen a few years ago. This shit's been going on there for years. There's a deep history of some really dark hood rat shit in that area involving some of these same parties. And again, these folks don't seem to want to say much, right? We see them in investigation discovery stuff, talking about the Shackleford case, talking about that miser case that likes to get cited a lot here in this Coberger case, right? The Idaho 4 case. Not the least of which they cite the Timothy McVeigh case for alternate perpetrators. The same Timothy McVeigh case connected to that same Aryan Nations compound. The same Aryan Nations compound that Dale Shackleford was, by his own admission in defense of alibi, was meeting with at the time of the murders. Fucking weird, folks. Real weird. But what's even weirder is, again, you have the most heinous crime in the state's history, quadruple homicide, 11/13/2022, and the sheriff of that county makes no statements until recently when he makes statements about housing Coberger in jail. When it comes to statements regarding the murder, old Sheriff Skiles has this to say. And his other buddy, the one that was the second officer on scene there at the Shackleford affair, he's the current chief deputy on the road there, who has no problem also going on investigation discovery, who has had nothing to say about the most horrific and heinous crime in the state's history that happened on their watch and their jurisdiction. I could have made him a Muppet, but I figured he's such a piece of shit, in my opinion. All of these people are, as far as their sad excuse for anything of law enforcement, upholding justice, or anything that I would call American or constitutionally bound. Scumbags could be another way to put it. But, I decided he's such a scumbag that, I didn't even want to make him a Muppet. He's just a donut. Reminds me of one of my old troops I had years ago. You know, as a retired military policeman myself, I am very much critical of those folks who do not have uphold ethics and morals in their jobs of enforcing the law. I've always been ardent opposition of such. Got me a lot of places I didn't want to be, but you know what? I sleep better at night. Anyhow, yes, sir. Low lifes indeed. I had an old troop. He was absolutely worthless. Any assignment you gave to him, any task, any detail, he would completely fuck it up. So eventually, you know, we just started, we wouldn't even refer to him by name. It was just a noise. He just devolved into being called a noise, where the best is not even worthy of a Muppet. He's just a fucking donut. So anyhow, as I thank you all again for joining me here to get a little GCD on the free Patreon previews here, patreon.com/Operation GCD for the remainder of tonight's program. If you catch this program in the future, this broadcast, please join us over there. Operation GCD subscribers, I appreciate your support. If you all want to sign up over there at Patreon, a couple recommendations. Do not, I'm not the vice president, again, not, but also do not sign up through Apple, because they charge like 30 or 40% surcharge. And folks having issues with Android, it seems like the solution to sign up over there at Patreon is to do so through a computer, then access later. So maybe both Apple and Android, that might be the best recommendation. But anyhow, yes, absolutely, ma'am. Always keeping it sus, just like they do in Latah County, Idaho, Satan's butthole. So anyhow, folks, yes, thank you all for joining me here. And you can catch me here tomorrow. No, what's today? Sundaze? Well, I won't be here tomorrow. I mean, you can catch me tomorrow. I won't be here tomorrow, but be here on Wednesdays for Operation GCD Wednesdays. We got, that's tonight. That's Sundays. That's the case of Dale Shackleford. 6 degrees of a fabricated murder case, Latah County style. But Wednesdays, I got my dudes, Clint Eastwood and Todd, the Wizard, former Mormon there, like myself, Exmo, from the Third World Assassin YouTube channel, joining me for an occult and or esoteric review of the 1985 cinematic masterpiece, The Goonies, starring everyone's favorite actor and performer, entertainer, who also shares the same birthday as myself. Thankfully, we don't share the fact that I didn't get diddled by Michael Jackson. So that'll be Wednesday, folks, The Goonies. And of course, Thursdays, we got Operation GCD Thursdays, The Anatomy of the Satanic Panic, where this Thursdays we'll be looking at the first, as we've gone over in that series, unpacking the real world, well organized, financed psyops to mind more psychological operations of everyone's favorite Green Beret U.S. Army. I don't believe for a second that he passed any physical fitness exam. This doughy bastard, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino, Muppet Mikey and gang. So we've been unpacking that, but in doing so, we find out that we don't see the first term of being really published of Satanic Panic is 1975. Despite the propagandists not want to point to that later, right? They moved that to 1980, but as we've seen at 75, so we're going to unpack some of the real world, actual satanic murders, ritual sacrifices, etc., that transpire from the years of 1966 to 1975, and also the incidents of satanic ritual abuse. And we can start to realize, once we start looking at all those incidents, why, in fact, they have to start developing this psychological operation, because shit got weird real fast here in America. Suddenly, we had this epidemic of satanic serial killers and satanic ritual abuse that, while in large part may, in fact, in smaller pockets and in smaller volume occurred beforehand, it was a sudden onset and explosion of these activities. Almost in an organized framework fashion, almost like he's setting up cells like he was in the Phoenix program. That is Muppet Mikey, that is. Weaponized folklore, weaponized religion. That was his game in the Phoenix program, and that's what he brought America in Satanism. So that'll be Thursdays and 9:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Times. And this Fridays, I have don't have that ready. I have Wisconsin Badgerlands podcast. You want me to talk weird Wisconsin mound stuff and ancient history of America? So highly recommend that one, folks. And on that note, folks of the interwebs, thank you all for joining me here tonight. Get a little GCD Patreon, folks of the interwebs. I'll catch you over here on the sides, on the Patreon sides here momentarily. And I almost forgot. How dare I? when I was looking at these things, I shouldn't be too surprised when I find these matters. But once again, my general thesis here I've developed over time in Operation GCD. All roads of parapolitical conspiracies and whatnot here in America, fine nation of America that I love, we see it going back to the Society of Cincinnati. I'm not saying any of these things in Latah County are specifically Society of Cincinnati related. What I am saying is it's not a surprise to me to not only find a member of the society at the root of all of these quote-unquote authority figures in Latah County. It's also not a surprise to me to find that individual is named Vance. Not my Vance. Not my wing of Clan Vance. Not an Abner Vance. He would descend from one of Abner's first cousins. A captain, let me see here. Not my Vance. I'm not holding any accountability for this character. But we see this fella, Captain Robert Vance Sr., out of the Pennsylvania chapter of the Society of Cincinnati. His descendant, possible hereditary member, is the husband of this lady who just retired recently after 30 years as the head of the records department at Latah County Sheriff's Department. So that's an interesting, and I only found this by going on their Facebook and looking for this Muppet fucker, that donut guy, Chief Deputy Best. And I'm like, wait a second, is that a Vance? I'm like, get the fuck out of here, dude. And it's a Vance. And again, I looked it up. It's her husband, Bruce, is, potentially, I don't have his membership card. He is the fourth great grandson of Captain Robert Vance from the Pennsylvania chapter. Again, that would have been Abner's first cousin on paper. Nonetheless, not a surprise to me, folks. Not only do all roads of conspiracies, cultures, and parapolitics in America lead back to the society, and a lot of times it comes up Vance. That's all I'm saying. So, anyhow, folks of the interwebs, I thank y'all again here for joining me tonight to get a little GCD. And if you think that's the only Society of the Cincinnati connection to these matters tonight, you would be wrong. So, see y'all over on the Patreon side. And other than that, catch you all, folks, next time.
Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend and the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GCD. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic. lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend and the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GC. Any world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze.
Boom!